Dom and Johnny in the morning. Okay, so for today, this is kind of top of mind based on the black belt classes I've been teaching this week, which is, from our limited understanding, never having worked with him directly, but just kind of listening to a lot of people that have, just kind of discussing from a broader perspective Fred Villari's vision for his art. Like, why was this the curriculum that he decided to teach? What were some of the goals that he had when codifying the curriculum? Like, why this art? So I don't know if you want to kick it off or.
I can. This is an interesting topic. I did not know what the topic was going to be.
I didn't either.
When we hit record.
Yeah.
But because I'm sure there are some answers in newspaper articles or magazine articles that I have not read. So I'm sure there's actual answers out there. So if anyone's listening, it's just like, that's not true. It might not be.
Well, and there's also, there's answers of how you talk to a public that doesn't really know. And then there's the answers of how you talk to your students that have been with you for a long time. And both can be correct.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great point. Because even I don't know if this is the right way to start this conversation, but Fred Villari was an incredible businessman. And he was an incredible marketer. So in addition to being a one-of-a-kind martial artist, he had this style that he created, that had a Kempo base that was then injected with 5-animal Kung Fu and with a little bit, traditional hard karate and a ton of other things that he amassed over his martial arts career to that point. And he named the style Shou Tung Hua. That should sound familiar. And that was his style, hands and feet in harmony, which it is. If you train in the system, you've probably guessed, pretty early on that we're pretty big on the whole hands and feet in harmony thing, whole body in harmony, actually. So the reason he changed it was because there was no brand recognition, and his main purpose, as far as I'm concerned, is he wanted anyone that wanted to be able to learn, and he believed that anyone could learn and anyone should learn. So spreading the martial arts to as many people as possible, I'm pretty sure it was one of his core principles. So he ended up calling it Shaolin Kempo Karate, and that was because Shaolin was super popular at the moment. People recognized all three of those names. They recognized Shaolin, they recognized Kempo, they recognized karate, and it did fit the system well. The 5 animals Kung Fu are typically associated with the Shaolin Temple. The interesting part is, especially if you read a lot of early interviews, he never says the word Shaolin. He typically refers to it as Chinese boxing. And his reasoning was because, technically speaking, Shaolin martial arts are martial arts taught at the Shaolin Temple. That's what they mean. So if Wing Chun is taught at the Shaolin Temple, that would be Shaolin Kung Fu. You're learning the Shaolin Temple curriculum. But 5-animal Kung Fu wasn't something that people really, they didn't know what it was at the time. Shaolin made more sense, and our roots came from Shaolin. 5-animal Kung Fu originally came from Shaolin Kung Fu, so it makes sense. So to kind of summarize that, I think he wanted to find the best way to deliver the art to as many people as possible. So that's why he changed the name. I think he wanted to make it recognizable, something that attracted people, and it worked. I can't think of many martial arts systems that have so many high-ranking black belts. And it's not because black belts are just given out like cars at an Oprah taping.
Yeah.
It's because all of these people have like anywhere between 40 and 55 years in the martial arts, and they're still here and still training.
Yeah, and even if you look on the internet for forums, which be careful with that, yeah, there are definitely a lot of skeptics and critics, and even among threads, that are critical and skeptical of the system, and its formatting and everything. A lot of people will just admit that especially the masters kind of in charge know their stuff and they hit hard. And let me tell you, having punched in for a couple of them with just 0.1% of their power, they could probably kill me. So yeah, and to your point about just training as many people as possible, from what I've been told, a lot of what was top of mind was making sure that whatever the first thing students were taught, those were going to be the simple things that would have the highest likely probability of coming out, which I think we've talked about in previous episodes before. But like the 8 blocks, like those are just 8 general directions. They're hard blocks, so you don't really need a lot of skill. You just need a little bit of timing. And yeah, your arm could get hurt, blocking that hard, using a hard surface on a hard surface. But so is the other person's. And especially amongst kids we teach, we've really, in general, had very few get into like fights or need to defend themselves. Of the few that have, like 9 out of 10 times, the entire thing was solved with a block. Someone took a swing, someone blocked, the person who swung said, "Ow, my arm hurts," and it stopped, And then the other thing is just being able to throw a basic palm or a kick. That's how we teach women self-defense. Just the ability, like, especially for most people, they try to swing from their upper body. The benefit to a kick is it's below line of sight, it has a longer reach, and it's using a stronger part of the body. So especially if your attacker, lacks any sophistication, they're not going to expect that to happen, especially if you don't need to practice it a lot of times to get a big result against someone else who's unsophisticated and untrained.
And if you watch the white to black series, you can see that progression of how, the white belt material. I think we fall into this, especially when we're new, is just like, yes, I can do kick cross cover. I know, side kick cross cover, 8 blocks. I got it, easy. Give me more stuff. But if you watch that and you watch how Master Villari, demonstrates on his poor Ukis.
Yeah.
It's amazing how effective it is, and how diverse the applications are to these things. So yeah, it is definitely a very easy and effective style right from the get-go.
Now, that being said, we addressed this 2 episodes ago now with combination design. And, like, you will see, like, you're looking at the orange belt or purple belt combinations, and you're like, wow, there's, like, a lot going on, and I don't, it seems a little rigid or a little scripted, and, we already broke down some of the reasons for that in the combinations episode, but to reiterate, one of the purposes behind that is really in terms of trying to fend off an unsophisticated or untrained attacker. You're kind of trying to just get that done at white belt. So, which frees you up now for, yellow, orange, purple, all the other ones to start installing some sophisticated principles with gross motor coordination, so that way you can tap into, like, the true value of the art, which is also not a secret. Like, we talk about it. It's just, it's hard to appreciate without the context of training yourself, which you've already talked about hands and feet in harmony, but to me, and from my understanding of other masters in the system, like, it comes down to the 4 ways of fighting. So Fred Villari, after training a lot of different styles, pretty much identified that it doesn't matter what style of martial art you do, that style is going to teach at least one of 4 different ways to fight somebody else in a physical conflict. So the 4 ways of fighting are, this is the order I also feel like we can go in. Kicking, which means hitting with your lower body. Striking, which means hitting with your upper body. Grappling, which is your ability to manipulate, joint lock, push, pull. And then felling, which is affecting the other person's balance. So a lot of times felling also features something that's not your body. Yeah. So like a major reap takedown, you're hitting them in the floor, or Other types of fells, you're hitting them against a wall or something. But I do love the idea that felling just means you're somehow affecting their balance. And of course, the same movement could actually check off more than one of those boxes, which is kind of like the point, is that not only do you have skill in all four ways of fighting, but eventually they kind of blend together, and you're moving so efficiently that you can't really tell if it's a strike, grapple, or fell, but you might be accomplishing all three with the same movement or sequence of movements.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, where does energy chi blasts fit in those four ways? Is that the fifth way of fighting?
So, what I will say, in an attempt to be diplomatic, is that your mindset does have a big impact on the other person. There have been times where, I've been helping an instructor far more experienced than I demonstrate something, and they change the way they look at me, which changes my nervous system's response to whatever pain I'm about to be dealt, and it does change the way that it works. So I don't know if I would call it, energy or chakra or like, I don't know what terminology would make sense, although I do feel like there is some sort of unexplored scientific reason why that would happen, some sort of fight or flight response based on imperceptible signals or something like that. But it is an element of fighting, like, that I don't want to downplay. It also just requires an intense amount of training that does not produce immediately measurable results. And so I can see why it often is overlooked in favor of more physical or cognitive skills that are easier to develop and measure.
No, that was a very diplomatic answer.
Yeah.
I'm just starting trouble.
Yeah.
We've heard it from Master John Fritz, and we've also heard from Master Fred Villari that fighting should be as natural as walking. I think that was a big thing for them too. Master Gappozo says efficient, effective, and effortless. So I think that was a big thing for him too, is fighting shouldn't feel unnatural. It should feel like anything else you do.
Yeah, well, and, to resolve a paradox that might be emerging in some listeners' minds, sometimes to be natural, you have to train unnaturally. So what I mean by that is, like, if you imagine a grandparent in their 70s or 80s, a lot of them can't just reach down and pick up their grandchild, right? They don't have the strength or the flexibility, or, their body has aged beyond a capability of performing that task. You take another person that's the same age but has done resistance training or weight training, that doesn't necessarily feel quote-unquote natural, right? You have to, like, artificially stimulate the muscles in order to strengthen them, and the result is something natural. Like, you can naturally pick down and pick up your kid, and it's effortless. So, again, going back to kind of the combination design part of it, you look at two combination, and it does not look natural or effortless. And there are many ways you could argue against teaching that way. And one of the most valuable lessons of two combination is the skip step, which I know you've been training personally, over the past few weeks to start a very long-term installation of that skill set for the next decade. So yes, it, like, on the outset when you're an orange belt learning it, it feels very rigid and structured and unnatural. But that's the weightlifting. You're strengthening your nervous system so that when you're in the fight, your feet just kind of shift in a subtle way that the other person just isn't going to be able to keep up with. So, yeah, it seems unnatural, but the end result is effortless and natural.
Yeah, and it's interesting for the listeners, that have been training a while. Just think about something like, what's a good example? Slapping out.
Yeah.
And when you slap out, you don't really think about it anymore. It's just, it makes sense. It's like, well, of course I'm slapping the ground, with the palms of my hands.
Yeah.
But I've plenty of white belts that I teach for the first time that slap with the other side of their hands, because that seems like the right thing to do for them. But yeah, as you go, it's just you build these new patterns into your nervous system that seem more natural in the long run. It's interesting. This is a weird parallel.
Mm-hmm.
It's about food. Is I love peanut butter. Like, I love peanut butter.
Okay.
Hear me out. Apples and peanut butter are like one of my favorite snacks. I eat them for breakfast, and I usually eat them before bed. And I used to use this Skippy natural peanut butter, and it had the coconut oil and stuff like that. It didn't have sugar, and I was like, this is the best stuff ever. And I remember eating 100%, just ground peanut butter.
Yeah.
Like nothing else. It's just peanuts. For the first time, being like, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
So that's all I eat now. And every now and then, I'll just be in a situation where the only thing there is like a normal jar of peanut butter.
Yeah.
And it tastes like toothpaste to me. It's like, it's so pasty, and I'm just like, this is gross and unnatural. It tastes weird to me. And beforehand, it would have been the opposite. I was like, oh, this is dry and gross. And, it's funny. Then your body just adapts, and it has a new perspective on what is natural and what feels natural and what doesn't.
Yeah, actually, on that point, Ken was telling me about this chef that was trying to make the same point. And what he would do is he'd take like a Lay's potato chip for like an audience, and he would just have them take the chip and then just put it on their tongue and hold it in their mouth and just let it dissolve. And you get the instant dopamine spike of all the salt and stuff, but eventually, as it would break down, you'd start to feel all the things they put in it. And what might seem like a fun quick snack at the start, soon you're like, ugh, nasty. You take like a whole ingredient food and do the same thing, and it's consistent. So it's not like it's a mask of, a sudden dopamine spike followed by the pain of all the chemicals that are actually in it. It's like you just put it on your tongue, and it is what it is. So I thought that was just a brilliant kind of mindfulness experiment that's food related. But yeah.
Back to the martial arts.
Yeah. So to kind of break down the 4 ways of fighting, because again, one of the ways that Ken talked about dragon, which is also kind of an animal of integration, is that the only way to get to that blended, natural, integrated fighting style is you have to stimulate the ingredients separately. You gotta have your flour and your egg before you can bake it into a cake. So to kind of move through the progression of, we have this goal of natural fighting, but also people have to start somewhere. So kicking is kind of the first one we focus on. The advantages to kicking are, like I said before, you have a longer reach usually than your arms. You're using bigger muscles, so it's a little easier to get power, especially for kids. And you're able to float up below the line of sight. And the other thing is it makes it easier to attack the pillars. So as Terry Silver would say on the Karate Kid, if they can't walk, they can't fight. So a lot of times, some of the situations that adults that have previously trained with us, or for whatever reason there's been some sort of violence, a front or a side kick, just the one thing, was able to neutralize the offender's motivation to continue their problematic behavior. It's probably the best way I can say it. And just doing that one thing, is made a huge difference. So do you have any thoughts on kicking or kicking arts?
Like kicking arts as in like Taekwondo and...
Well, whatever. I don't know.
Or Savate.
Sure.
Savate, the lesser known kicking art. French Savate's pretty cool, actually. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it has way more in common with karate than the other kicking arts.
Well, and that's where the kicking and karate kind of came from, right?
Yeah.
As the French Savate practitioners in Okinawa, because it was a trade port.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, yeah. And And you could definitely see the parallels if you watch them. And not to mention, Savat's done in shoes, which is pretty cool too. So it is a shoe kicking art. So and the Japanese took off their shoes,
Well, yeah,
Makes
it's more
sense.
of a cultural thing. Yeah.
Shoes come off before you go into most buildings. But the kicking in our system is pretty cool because you have these like kicking milestones. You have white belt, front kick, back kick, side kick. You integrate them in these combinations. You have 6 combination, 7 combination, 6 combination kick cross cover, 7 combination step kick cross cover. And then you all of a sudden you just start focusing on hands. You do 1 pinion, 2 pinion, a bunch of hand combinations and stuff, and you just kind of forget about kicking. You're still working on those basic kicking principles, and then you hit blue belt. And all of a sudden, blue belt and blue with a stripe, you're learning all these kicking combinations, and you got a roundhouse kick at purple belt, in 4 combination, but now you're doing these, complex, not putting a foot down, doing a front kick, and then pivoting into a roundhouse kick, and then stepping and side kicking, and then you're doing, front kick into a spinning back kick. So it's pretty cool. You get this basic kicking core, and then all of a sudden you kind of stop again, and now it's more integration of everything, and it's like you kicking, punching, advanced kicking, advanced striking, and then integration.
Yeah.
And it's neat, and then the grappling is just kind of sprinkled in throughout.
So I think there's like a direct application of kicking, like you mentioned. And I also think, especially at blue and blue stripe belt, what kicking also helps you do is diagnose gaps in a student's kinetic chain. Because a lot of people think of kicking as a leg thing. So, they think you need leg strength to balance. And that is partially true. But really, it's a test of your core. So when you're doing the 2 or 3 kicks in 8 and 9 combination, or the rotating kick in 12, you're really getting to see if there are any hiccups in a student's transference of power and transference of weight. I also think, especially for something like 12 and 14, by lifting a leg off the ground, it forces your hips to start to learn how to transfer power, which you really then transfer to your hands once you start getting into black belt, which kind of, I think, segues us into striking. So striking is a lot like kicking, except it's a little quicker, has a little less potential power, although sometimes the difference becomes negligible as you get higher and higher in rank, because, man, some of those masters hit hard. Yeah. And I think the benefit of striking is that it can act as a vehicle to the other ways of fighting in a way that kicking can't. Because you can grapple with your legs, but it's just not going to be as common as grappling with your hands. Now, that being said, a lot of times a kick can be the opening to close distance so you can get your hands on them. Like you mentioned, that's a lesson of one kata. But that is, like, striking is the most common thing you see in most stuff in our system, and that's not an accident.
It makes sense. If you look at Master Villari's roots, coming from boxing and wrestling, it makes sense that there's such an emphasis on striking in this style. And not to mention, we're really not distance fighters. Even though, there's a lot of interpretation in the art, from practitioner to practitioner based on limb length and, how much weight they have and all these different things. If you watch most practitioners, we are pretty close fighters. So unlike Taekwondo, which tries to keep a pretty steady distance, because once they get jammed up, it's a lot harder for them to do stuff. I think we embrace the closeness.
Yeah.
And I think that's why striking, especially the close quarter striking that Master Villari does with a lot of the Shaolin principles, becomes so important. And it's also very interesting to see all the different styles of striking that are housed in our system too.
Yeah.
Because you do see a little bit of that boxing. You do see a little bit of that karate striking, and then, you hit the Kempo striking, and then all of a sudden Shaolin, and like I mentioned before, Shaolin is just a fancy way of saying 5 animal Kung Fu. So now you have 5 different ways to strike, and then if you add monkey and eagle,
Yeah.
6, 7, and then if you add like the ascended animals like snow leopard and Tibetan crane, white tiger, immortal dragon, all that stuff, like you have so many ways to express power through your hands. So it's pretty cool. I think there's a lot of really cool striking principles in this art.
Well, and again, beginner, just learning to defend themselves, you don't need a whole lot.
No.
You pretty much need palm heel, maybe front punch if you care to train the alignment correctly. But you do have a lot of different strikes. Like even before first degree black belt, there are 42 unique strikes that students are taught. Yeah, and a lot of it is because Fred Villari thought situationally. So you have a Taekwondo person that you're up against, right? Close distance. You have someone that's grappling. Don't let them close distance. Like figure out how to disrupt them enough so that they're not gonna be able to get their hands on you and lock you up. So you've got like punching from boxing, but I'm also thinking of something like an open tiger's mouth, which is like it's a strike and a grapple in one. You're training one hand formation, you're training one motion, but what you do after the fact could be a lot of different things. You could just hit and retract, and you get hit in the throat. That's gonna stun you for a moment.
It's kind of all the tiger strikes too. Tiger claws do the same thing. Tiger rakes do the same thing.
Yeah,
you have that shock, and then that seize.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can choose to come off of them, or you can choose to seize and follow through. And really, I think that versatility is what Fred Villari wanted to encourage. Don't have one way of doing things. And a lot of people will talk about Fred Villari was a proponent of the middle path, so you don't sit in extremes. You kind of sit in the middle. So even diet wise, he has a joke in his book about dieting and just like, you don't need to do anything extreme. You don't need to just eat celery and the occasional grape. Like, sometimes it's sometimes you allow yourself the indulgences, but ultimately you just want to make sure that you're doing everything in a moderated way. And although moderation means something different than I think a lot of people want to admit. But the idea is just, the middle path, the balanced path, that's the one that's probably going to yield the best result. So kicking, striking, grappling is the next one. You've mentioned that he does a lot of grappling.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you and it is so many systems of grappling combined, because you have someone who started as a wrestler who also did jiu-jitsu. So you have wrestling and jiu-jitsu. And then his Kempo training had, the Kempo grappling in it that came from judo, jiu-jitsu. And then he had the Shaolin grappling. So the 5-animal grappling, which not every animal chooses to grapple, but some of them, like tiger, definitely grapples. Crane doesn't, but Tibetan crane does. And then obviously snake is huge. Snake's a big grappling style. And then the China styles, and then he did Mongolian wrestling, which is like the antithesis of Shaolin. You have the soft kung fu, and then you have this like brute force grappling style that's all about using your body weight against your opponent in Mongolian wrestling. He had all these really cool grappling styles that he kind of layered on to this into our system, which is it's those kind of things that separate us from the Kempo core. It's not really the conversation, but if you had like something that's really sticky, like a ball that's really sticky, and like everything that it comes into contact with, it just like sticks to the outside.
Yeah,
that's kind of what Kempo is. And Master Villari just took as much as he could and stuck it to the outside of this Kempo core. But the grappling, I think, is out of this world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner and someone who works with other Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, my astonishment, I feel like is justified because I get to work with these high-ranking masters here. But with my limited knowledge, I see the astonishment in like other practitioners of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that are just like, holy moly, like that is awesome. And not trying to say it's better or anything like that, but I think there's sometimes a stigma that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the ultimate.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes they don't realize that all of a sudden, like, whoa, that's hard to deal with.
Yeah.
Like, yes. Yeah. And to the same extent, so are Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. They're very hard to deal with.
Yeah.
Just because they are so good at keeping you uncomfortable.
And just some qualities of grappling that I've noticed. So not only do you have joint locks and manipulations, we were talking a little bit about it before the recording too, and we even mentioned it with the Tiger stuff, which is there's a lot of seizes as well. So, one of the things Ken told me about is there was like another martial artist he met, and when the guy I think he was a Kempo guy, so it was a lot of like kind of quick handset striking and stuff, and Ken was like his muscles were so defined it felt like rock climbing. So if you imagine, you're used to like having your hand punch, and all of a sudden there's fingertips slipping in between the grooves of the muscle, a very uncomfortable feeling. So, and I feel like, Fred Villari's grappling in particular, it's not just the locks which you see, but I mean one of the funny videos we have, funny in a dark way, is he grabs a guy by like the ears and like takes him down by the head, and that's not something that you would see in a lot of styles because it's not super safe to practice, but it is something that's good to know if you're in kind of a life or death situation. Yeah. So a lot of, just being able to seize into hooks of the body, and be able to deliver various amounts of pain based on the situation that you're in, that could be a helpful thing. And I don't see a lot of seizing arts talked about as much as like the joint lock manipulation ones.
Yeah, and it makes sense because there's it's like the whole MMA philosophy too. Like if you train in MMA for 4 months and you train in karate for 4 months, who's gonna win? The MMA fighter is gonna wipe the floor with the karate dude.
Yeah,
I think it's the same with jiu-jitsu and something like the white tiger seizing and controlling.
Yeah.
Because that takes a lot of dexterity and strength in your tendons and your fingers, as well as the forearms, and that's not something that develops in 4 months.
Right.
So I feel like dedicating your life to that is it's a lot harder than
right.
So you're not going to see it as much. And even I try so hard to emulate what my instructors do on me.
Yeah.
But I'm nowhere near that, 20-something years in. And they probably feel the same about their instructors.
And also, you mentioned earlier, that is why Fred Villari had so many long-term students, because you're not capping the curriculum too early. So you can look at it skeptically and say it's a marketing decision for greedy Westerners, which can also be true. I'm not saying it's not. And also, because there's a depth and a fullness in the vision he had for his art, you can train the same art 60 years, like Master Raposo, and you could come into every seminar where another master has been teaching and be like, I'm still learning new things about it. I'm still refining my art so much time later. Master Fritz, who has passed away, Ken has mentioned getting hit by him in his 70s was way worse than getting hit by him in his 50s. He didn't stop skill development as his body aged. He only got more efficient, more intuitive, more effective, at least from a fighting perspective. So the last one is felling, and felling is just affecting your opponent's balance. This is the one that I think has had the most contentious definition over the years. I've had multiple different masters try to describe it. I like Master Raposo's definition the best. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're taking them to the ground like a judo throw or something. But anytime you're affecting your opponent's balance.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And actually, if you think about it, if it was Master Villari probably would have called the third way of fighting takedowns.
Yeah.
Striking, kicking, takedowns, and grappling. Or the fourth way of fighting. I don't know if they're in any particular order. Striking, kicking, grappling, felling, I think is what we normally say.
Yeah. The only reason I put kicking first is because, like you said, kicking is like the first combinations we teach. And from, again, the time I've had testimonials of adults who have trained in this style and they've needed to defend themselves. That tends to be the most common thing that comes up is I kicked them and ran away. Mm-hmm. So I like putting kicking first just because like when you've trained it, it's a little more intuitive. And then striking does take a little more skill, but it is the most common way of fighting. And then grappling and felling are usually like they're both more sophisticated. But I do feel like you see grappling first because usually, especially with our green belts, you're trying to get them to grapple more, not grapple less. Whereas with a fell, it can be a little too easy to go the opposite, where you slam them on the ground harder than you mean to. Mm-hmm. So you're almost trying to teach them to pull back a little bit, whereas grappling, you're almost trying to encourage them to add a little bit more.
Yeah. And we're lucky, I think, in this style. I did judo for about 6 months, and because you have so little control over what's going to happen to you as an uke, you get pretty messed up. And here, because we're always thinking about what happens after, even though in judo they do too, but we don't typically let go of the arm. So like when we do a takedown, like I still have control of my opponent's arm.
Yeah.
And it allows me to take someone down hard but still control them to the ground.
Yeah.
Unlike like a perfect judo throw where the match is done. Ippon, they call it.
Yeah.
There's nothing else. You don't need anything else. That beautiful takedown is it. They call the match, that person won. And half the time they're landing on top of you. So I think just the way we fight, we have a little bit more control over not hurting our opponent.
All right. Any closing thoughts?
I think it is kind of neat to think about, and this is just a guess, but if you look at the way Master Villari moved from when he started to when he finished his martial arts career, and it's so drastically different, and you gotta wonder if his intentions were different too at that point. So I do think when he started, my guess is that he wanted to disseminate the martial arts to as many people as possible. Yeah. Because he felt that it would be a better world if everyone learned karate. Mm-hmm. I agree. But towards the end of his life, I wonder what his intentions were. Because they could have been very different. Different world. It is interesting. I don't know if we mentioned it in side conversation or if we mentioned it on the podcast. Sometimes I forget. A lot of the stuff that was gated 10 to 15 years ago is now being openly given to, even under mastery. So things like the 11 hands, which was a very gated thing at one point. And now it's not. So it makes you wonder, how Master Villari's intentions differed as he went on, instead of withholding as much information, trying to make sure that everyone had it. Interesting. I don't know.
Dom and Johnny in the morning.